Okay, this is my last lecture of the year. And it's about us, it's about the United States of America. Really important if you live here. And when we left off, we were talking about Nixon, Watergate. He was the only president to ever resign. And in his vice president takes over, Gerald Ford, only for like a year and a half, very little happens. In 1976, Georgian peanut farmer and Democrat named Jimmy Carter was elected president. Carter was a strong proponent of clean energy. He tries to push environmental policies, many of which started during Nixon's presidency. He put solar panels on the White House. He asks Americans to conserve energy during the kind of gas crisis we have in the 70s. Gas prices go up hugely. OPEC, the oil producing companies of countries of the Middle East, first they stopped selling us gas, and then they raised the price of gas dramatically. Gas, of course, oil is used for cars, planes, such a huge part of our economy, which really hurts our economy. Under Carter, the economy, inflation goes up, the economy suffers. Carter asks Americans to conserve. Americans don't really like that. His downfall, well, he only gets one term. He's one of the few presidents since World War II to only get one term. Right? Truman gets two, Eisenhower gets two, JFK/Johnson get two, Nixon gets two, Carter gets one, Reagan gets two, Clinton gets two. Bush the first gets one, Clinton gets two, Bush the second gets two, Obama gets two, Trump gets one. So it's 8-3. He's one of the three. It's not a list you want to be on. Inflation was high, interest rates were high, and average salaries went down. Few quick pictures here. Of course, here is President Carter. He's still alive. The guy's in his 90s. He's alive building houses for people. His post-presidency has been pretty great. Although his presidency was flawed here. The solar panels he put on the White House, although Reagan takes them down, yeah, it's free energy. But really, maybe his biggest problem was what's happening in Iran. The Iran hostage crisis happens in 1869, where the Iranians move in and take over the U.S. embassy, take a bunch of hostages. He tries to free the hostages and fails. He looks weak. And here we have pictures of the hostages and failed attempt and such. And in 1980, Ronald Reagan, Republican, is chosen president. Now let's just quickly look at the politics of America. So we have FDR and Truman for 20 straight years. Changes America. Eisenhower is a middle-of-the-road Republican. 8 years for Johnson, Democrat. 8 years. So right there, though, if we just focus on those years, okay, we're going to say 28 years Democrats, 8 years Republicans. Country moves to the left. Starting with Nixon, we're going to see 8 years for Nixon, Ford, 4 years for Carter, 8 years for Reagan, 8 years for Bush the first. That is the opposite. That is 20 years Republican, 4-year Democrat. Country shifts to the right. Okay, and then since then we've had 8 years Clinton, 8 years Bush the second, 8 years Obama, only 4 years Trump. Who knows if Biden's going to get 4 or 8. We'll see. It's kind of back and forth now, right? So anyways, Reagan is elected president. Here's our President Reagan, by the way, Governor of California, represent, way to go, Ronnie. Reagan was very conservative. He cut back on social programs, including food stamps, school lunches, and jobs programs. He increased military spending and even promised a missile defense shield called Star Wars, where there would be planes in outer space shooting down bombs in case the Soviets launched them over. Never happened, but sounded cool. By the way, Star Wars, great movie. I'm a nerd. I'm a Star Wars guy. I'm Team Luke, by the way, just in case anyone had the question. He also cut tax rates for the rich, especially the very top 1%. because of the decrease in government revenue, one thing that happens during these 8 years is that the borrowing of our country, the massive national debt that we have, that I've been told before by an economics student, it could be the downfall of our country, starts huge under him. So if we look at our borrowing, we can see, not bad, not bad, not bad, not bad. Whoa, tripled under Reagan. And that trend continued under his vice president, Bush, who then became the next president. Clinton mellows it out, and then Bush, and even Obama continues the upward trend. Trump makes it even worse. We're borrowing like crazy. Well, COVID makes it the very worst, and that we're not going to blame that on Trump. But he did raise borrowing from Obama's. This isn't economics, so I'm not going to spend that time. We look at the tax cuts that he gives, starting here. So why are we borrowing so much? Well, because we used to tax the rich heavily. This is marginal tax rates on the rich. 90% for every dollar they made after a few million. That's just too much. 70% from Kennedy to Carter all the way into Reagan. And then Reagan cuts it to 29. Well, that's why we're borrowing so much. We stopped taxing the people with the money. And it never has gotten back above 40, although during the Clinton and Obama years, it goes up. Borrowing goes down during those years. Clinton even ran 4 years of a surplus. Fun fact, we'll get there. And he was a very strong leader against the USSR, had a strong relationship with Gorbachev, and is in part credited for ending the Cold War. Probably Gorbachev is the main reason why, but Reagan might be number two. Maybe Brezhnev and Khrushchev. Maybe Bush the first. Maybe Reagan. He did a really good job. And then his vice president takes over, named George Bush first. I don't have a slide for him, but he kind of follows Reagan's policies, nothing different. He does get us into the war in the Persian Gulf against Iraq to try and free Kuwait, which was successful. But the economy slows down, and we get a new president named Bill Clinton. Here's Bill. Bill Clinton, governor of Arkansas. We see Bush, right? I don't give him a slide. I don't give one-term president slides. Just kidding. I gave Carter a slide. I should make one Bush. Clinton, though, is elected claiming to be a new Democrat. He's going to be a moderate Democrat. He wants to follow some Republican policy, economic policies. He doesn't want to raise taxes back up to the massive levels that they used to be underneath FDR and Truman, Eisenhower, and even under Kennedy and Carter, and Nixon. He raises taxes on the rich, though, to 40%, not up to 1970s levels or 50s, but higher than it had been for 12 years. And actually, it works. Look, we have 4 straight years of budget surplus. He saves money. Our economy does great under Clinton. Now, let's be fair, the internet starts under Clinton too, so that was a pretty big boost for the economy as well. So those combined factors. We always want to credit presidents when the economy does great, and then discredit presidents when the economy does do great. But in reality, it was probably a combination of both for all presidents, not just for Clinton. We mentioned that we don't blame Trump for the coronavirus, right? We'll talk about the Great Recession. He's the only president to have 4 straight years of budget surplus on recorded record. I mean, there was a few under Nixon, a few under Eisenhower, one here, one there, but never 4 in a row, though. And was that internet, John, was driven or not? I don't know. Foreign policy-wise, we mentioned he had helped solve the situation in Yugoslavia by twice bombing Serbia for their atrocities. And that did bring an end to the Serbian leader, Slobodan Milosevic's rule, which helped the region similar ethnic and religious values, let's say. So there's an interesting fact. He also was impeached. He became the 3rd president ever to be impeached. He was impeached for having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. Here's a picture of him and Monica. I'm sorry you had to be dragged into this, Monica. You're just a 21-year-old intern who worked in the White House who was probably starstruck. And but then he lied about it and asked about it on national television, so he was impeached. Should he have been impeached for lying about an affair? You decide. But, in part because of the impeachment and the fact that his vice president, Al Gore, decided not to embrace him, which maybe he should have because he was turned out to, his policies were pretty successful. We get a Republican in office, George W. Bush II, George Bush's son. It was the closest election ever. I think it was 536 votes in Florida that ended up making the difference there. Okay, sorry about that. I actually had a student visit me the first time I've actually met one of my students. Ashley, stopping by, and your mom. Okay, so anyways, super, super close election, 2000, Bush wins, 534 votes in Florida. There's a recount, it's madness, but Bush wins. And he quickly does this policy called No Child Left Behind. It was important to me as a teacher. It was about education. It's when this whole testing thing started. They were trying to make sure that all students were all schools were doing a good job. Some would suggest it was too much testing. But really, though, the big thing that happens in his presidency was that first year is the attacks of September 11th. Here's George Bush. On September 11th, 2001, terrorists hijack 4 planes. They fly them into the Twin Towers in New York, which collapse. One into the Pentagon in DC, which is our military headquarters. And one, apparently the people on the plane got back and brought the plane down in a field in Pennsylvania. Bush then goes to war in Afghanistan, which is where the leader of these terrorist attacks was hiding, Osama bin Laden. And we have the war in Afghanistan. I talked about that. The U.S. does change the leadership of Afghanistan, although we don't really know if that's going to stick, and it never really calmed the countryside down. They more created peace in the capital city, but most of that country stayed out of the U.S. control, and the U.S. didn't bring a lot of soldiers in, so that country's kind of a mess still. In 2003, George Bush starts a war with Iraq, claiming they had weapons of mass destruction, which were never found. Chemical weapons, he was afraid that they would give them to terrorists. Some people say he bought them for oil or for whatever, because other reasons. But again, he never fully takes control of the country. We have kind of a light troop presence, and after he pulls the troops, he decides to pull the troops out in 2008. 2011, country is taken back over by a terrorist group. These wars that Bush started really neither have been decisive victories, and both could be losses. But we'll see how those turn out completely. These wars cost trillions of dollars added to our debt, which we already said was a problem. But in 2008, speaking of economics, we have the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. It took place in large part because of a housing bubble. People were throwing money into housing markets and giving loans to people who couldn't really afford to pay them back. They had kind of made it too easy for people to get loans for houses. And people would think that, we're just going to buy a house and then flip it. But anyway, so when the house prices went down, which always happens, right? Houses always kind of go up and down. But there was a massive fall off. Actually, houses were wildly house prices were wildly overinflated. A lot of people just stopped paying them back. They didn't have the money to pay them back. They thought they would just flip the house and make a profit. I think house prices more than doubled in 5 years. And then the banks started to fail, because people stopped making their payments on their houses, which caused banks to possibly fail. And it was a huge mess. President Bush had to give trillions of dollars to the banks for them to stay afloat. And so did his predecessor, President Barack Obama, who speaking of, President Barack Obama was, of course, the first African-American president elected as president. So Tupac, I guess we were ready. When he comes into power, the Great Recession is going on. He works with Bush to save the banks, and then he saves the auto industry. multi-billion, $100 billion bailout of the auto industry. But then he really kind of rights the ship, and we have a bunch of years of positive economic growth. You can see here, this is the beginning of the Great Recession, the handoff to Bush, right, the very worst time of the Great Depression, from Bush, red, to Obama, blue. But Obama pulls it back together, and he has a series, I think, 7 straight years of positive growth. Although not massive growth, enough growth, he really does kind of right the ship and get things back going the way that they probably, similar to how they were going before that moment. He passes, one of his signature achievements was the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which does overhaul the insurance system, medical insurance system in this country, but it's not single payer healthcare, which some were hoping for. He just kind of requires that, you know, hospitals and insurance companies offer more services to their people. He increases government help to help people, low-income people, pay for insurance. He does something that will benefit you. He makes sure that kids can stay on their parents' insurance till they're 25. So he makes some modifications to the insurance system, but he allows the private insurance companies to stay in control of the system, and doesn't take a government control over it like we see in Canada and European countries. And he's the president during the Arab Spring, when we see revolutions break out in the Middle East, which, oh, by the way, is the same area that Bush took us to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, the same area that the terrorists who attacked our country on September 11th came from. These are all connected. Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria all have civil wars. He does actually intervene in Libya, helps overthrow the leader Muammar Gaddafi, who had brought down the U.S. jet in 1984. This guy had already attacked our country. Well, at least a jet airliner in Europe. But during his term is when ISIS, who the troops have been pulled out of Iraq, ISIS then forms in the Middle East and takes over huge population center of Mosul and other parts of Iraq, and then also parts of Syria, which leads to a massive immigrant problem or immigration problem in Syria, where many Syrians are now displaced and have to move either to Jordan or try and seek refuge in Europe, which causes a huge influx in immigrants in Europe, which we discussed earlier as being a potential problem there in our modern world. We then had 4 years of President Trump, the reality TV show host, who was elected president. You know, I'm not going to go too much into those years other than say he was impeached twice. And we'll let history decide more about that. We currently have Joe Biden, and again, we'll let history decide that. He's been president for 4 months. So